Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.
We hope you enjoy listening to this podcast of St. Louis on the Air, brought to you by University College at Washington University, with undergraduate and graduate programs part-time, evening, and online. University College at Washington University, offering world-class education within reach.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. When Michael Brown was shot and killed in Ferguson almost 4 years ago, the community erupted. One of the most stabilizing influences at the time and since was Reverend F. Willis Johnson, then pastor at the Wellspring Church in Ferguson. Wellspring is closed now. Reverend Johnson is moving on to start a new church in Ohio. He is also co-founder and director of the Center for Social Empowerment and the author of Holding Up Your Corner, talking about race in your community. And I'm told he is working on another book. Maybe it'll be out this fall. Reverend Johnson, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Brother Marsh.
Why are you leaving?
Well, it's time. It's been 7.5 years, and the opportunity to do a new thing has presented itself, and so after a lot of prayer and a lot of tears, my wife and I decided to kind of follow that.
What kind of a community are you going to?
Well, it's interesting. Columbus is a thriving, most people are familiar with it because of the Ohio State University, but Columbus is one of the fastest growing communities in the nation right now, but yet also very much contending with issues and challenges similar to what we face here and around the country. But really the opportunity to do a new thing and be in a new place was very exciting.
Do you have any concern that by leaving Ferguson and just going anyplace else, that some people here might think that you're giving up on Ferguson?
Yeah, I've had those conversations,
really?
But even coming here, not only with the church, but our presence here has always been that we knew that this was bigger than us, that we were, our family and I, we were participating and we were present in a larger work. I'm not leaving Ferguson because of anything specific, but I can see why people think that, and it's somewhat humbling, but also I think it even speaks to all the more why it's important maybe that we move on, because we're not the only people doing things in Ferguson. And the community has to go forward.
Yeah. What will you take with you from Ferguson that could be of use and value to you in your new post?
Oh, man, I learn how to listen. I've learned how to listen in ways that I know I didn't do that before. The value of community, the need for space and place that is not just open and inviting, but empowering. I'm even more resolved that we have to empower people, and not only empower people with rhetoric, but with the responsibility. I'm still very disappointed that in many of the strides that we've made, where we have continued to lag, is that individuals within not only that community but across the country still do not see themselves or view themselves as powerful in the process.
How do you change that? I mean, it's one thing to talk about it. We talk a lot about conversations, but how do you change it? How do you empower responsibility?
If I can figure it out and write it down, I'll sell a lot of books. I think it's just a continual orientating of people, which is what we've done for a long time in this community over the last 4 years. Raising the challenge before folks, and creating what are the ways and means in which we can hold each other accountable. I think we've told people, let's just use, for instance, the voting piece. We've talked about that many times, specific to Ferguson. We need people to participate in the process, so we need people to run. We have that. We have new candidates. We have new leaders across that community in education, in the city council, in the municipal life. However, we continue to see that the voting participation, the civil activity of individuals is not progressed or challenged. We've got to hold people accountable to that. We have to honor the fact that while it is a right to or not to, that the result of our actions or inactions are what we're dealing with. So for every person, I just got stopped earlier today from someone who asked me the question, nothing against our mayor, but asked me, after all of the things in Ferguson and what we saw, how did your current mayor remain in office? And I said, because people chose not to participate.
At the same time, and by the same token, if we look to what's going on nationally, when people in power are taking a look at voting rights and kind of tinkering with them, and that's not going in the direction you want to go.
No. And they can do that when we do not exercise not only our civil right, but what I think is our inalienable right, which is to be present, to be heard, to be respected. And I wish I had the antidote for that sickness or that challenge, but I think my hope is to continue to champion that, challenge people in that responsibility, but then continue to hold each other accountable. I mean, I've taken some lumps from time to time, Brother Marsh, because I've not been Pollyanna. I've challenged us. I've been on this show before and said, yes, things have changed, but much has not changed because systems continue to operate and avail themselves as systems do. And so I'm glad that we have diversity, on the school board. I'm glad we have diversity on the city council. I'm glad we have a more diverse police force. And yet we still have a municipality that still is struggling and surviving and yet not thriving. We have organizations in the community that are very representative of the people, but maybe some of what we do and who we are is not as empowering to those very people that we represent.
It seems to me that the most empowering thing of all is jobs. It's economic stability and economic equity.
Yeah. If you when you get paid, then you can play more, you can invest more. I think we have to look at some different strategies. You asked me before, what have I learned that I would take with me? I'm challenged to look at what are the non-traditional ways and means that we address some of those equity problems. It's not only just trying to get someone a job, but we have to be honest. We have to instill and develop or nurture work ethic. Good example. Just the other day, I had some young men that came by our home and wanted to cut the grass, and my wife was like, "Yes, let's support these young people," and it's good. They did it. But I was sitting there thinking, I've talked to them since then over the last couple of days, and my thing is, they've shown some initiative, but we also need to structure what it means to begin at that very basic level to build business, to build entrepreneurial skill set and capacity. Everybody's not going to go to an 8-hour class or an 8-week class and then let them place you, and that's going to work. We're going to have to do and both and more. And so, yes, employment, education, equitability continue to be a problem across the globe, across the country, in particular students of color, people of color. But I think, again, my honest critique is we're not going to program our way out of these things. There's a layering and a continuum of care that I think we've tried to seed, whether that's in the faith community or in nonprofits, but also individuals and those same communities have to avail themselves to the longitudinal nature of that. There are no quick fixes, and I feel like sometimes both in Ferguson and St. Louis, we have just wanted to remedy and respond and not truly redress what are not just the symptoms, but the causes.
Yeah, and to accomplish that, you also need political help, and that's where the voting comes in again. But that's time-consuming.
Voting and leadership. I mean, let's again. I can say this out the door, but I've said it before. We have to hold accountable our leadership. We have to. we have to make sure that when people get into a particular responsibility of office, that we're holding them accountable. We're seeing that across our state right now, that we are so adamant and partisan at times that we're not logical, that we're not empathic, that we're not decent, that we're not, smart. Yeah. Just having the other or doing something alternative is not the answer. Or having someone like-minded or like us is not the only result. So we'll see. We'll see.
What kind of marks would you give political leadership locally and statewide since the Michael Brown shooting?
I think that a good C to C plus all around would work. I mean, I respect that. I've always said that we cannot legislate love, and we cannot adjudicate justice. That loving in public, caring, empowering people has to be a want to, not a have to. I believe that there are women and men who are willing to avail themselves to the very hard work of responding to a lot of the major crises. But I think we're going to need to deepen our bench. I think that we need to move past, particularly in the community where I reside for the last 7.5 years. We've got to get to be substantive. I've grown weary of going to debates or candidate forums where the first thing somebody gets up and says is, well, I've lived in this community for 25 years, for 30 years, for 50 years. All my children went through this school system. Or I own a business. I own a house. Well, those are all dog whistles. And I've experienced that. No one ever asked somebody, have you ever balanced a budget?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you ever led somewhere and someone? So we have representation. We're moving towards greater representation. But I say a C plus because I think the capacity and the advocacy and of our leadership is there. But you've been here a long time, Brother Marsh, both at the state level and even in this local community. What has changed?
Not very much, and that's one of the things about this part of the country is things are very, very slow to change and frustratingly slow to change. It's always been my observation. I think the diffusion of the community, the fact that we've got so many, quote, leaders, so many mayors, so many politicians out there, but who is the leader? If you had to identify a leader in this general area, who would it be? Would it be the mayor of St. Louis, or the county executive, or any of the mayors in the municipalities around here? A business leader? I'd like someone to identify that person.
Well, I think the irony of August 2014 was that there was or has emerged voices, presence, leaders that are outside of the traditional system.
Bruce Smith comes to mind. One of them.
Now, the challenge has been how do those individuals remain anchored and vigilant locally, because a lot of the names that are now nationally recognized in terms of young people and out of the 2014 experience, out of clergy leaders and the alike, honestly, we're rarely here. I mean, because people have taken interest in their capacity, their voice, their insight, and say, how do we share this? I've been very disappointed. I guess the old adage is, a prophet is without honor in their own land. Yeah. We have people like Tracy Blackman, Reverend Tracy Blackman, Starsky Wilson, Brother Bruce, people that you
Amy
name.
Hunter, people like that.
Yeah,
you can go on
and we can go on, and DeRay and DeRay and all kind of other people that you see on MSNBC or Fox or wherever all the time. These are all young men and women, individuals who stood on the streets of Ferguson, who live and work and see great work even now. but they are not necessarily readily sought out, other than to trumpet or to lift up in general space. That's not necessarily there's not a roundtable interest that comes and says, hey, how do we supplant? I talk to more mayors around this country than I talk to my own mayor.
Really? Really?
For a lot of reasons.
Yeah. Well, I've got to say this, and the people that you've mentioned, and there are many unmentioned that should be, they're all going to stay here. You're going.
Yeah. Well, in fairness, I was a transplant when I got here 7.5 years ago. I came in the proverbial dark. I arrived in January of 2011 with in a rent-a-car and my stuff. Went out to Baldwin, Missouri, off of Manchester, to an office that most people on the sound of my voice would not even know existed, which was the United Methodist Church and its district office there. Mm-hmm. And when I got there, Brother Marsh, I was handed by the then DS, or district superintendent, a Ziploc bag of keys, nondescript, that I had to sort through, and another envelope with some keys to a parsonage in Ferguson. And over time, my presence became known and felt. Mm-hmm. I never came here looking to leave, but always knowing that I was sent here on assignment. Mm-hmm. And so I lived my life and my acts of service in this community, committed fully, heart and spirit to it, but also understanding that I was on assignment. Mm-hmm. I don't know where everyone else is in their particular space and position, but I feel like we have done what we were set out to do. It's with a sad, kind of with sadness, and it's bittersweet. And honestly, I have stayed probably longer than I was supposed to, because I feel this commitment. We're not gone. We still have in place our Center for Social Empowerment that will have physical space and personnel here. We'll continue to take the message and the work, not only of Ferguson, but of Wellspring Church, where we go. And hopefully we seeded something that others can nurture and harvest.
I have to take a break, but it just occurs to me as you've been speaking here, when you talk about that Ziploc bag full of keys, that's really a metaphor for what you do, isn't it? Finding the right key to unlock whatever and the people you meet.
Yeah, I guess it is. It and I think it's not just for me. I think it's for all of us. I always tell people all the time, real quick, the answers are inside of us. All the things that we wish to eradicate or change, we have the ability to do so. Mm-hmm. We can stop hate right now by start liking, loving, and caring. We can stop what is inequitable by being interested in making sure that others have, at minimum, what they need, and at maximum that which we would want for ourselves. That doesn't take the city, county council. That doesn't take great acts from on high. That's an individual choice every day. Yeah.
You remind me of a quote one of our producers has put in front of me here on the computer, and this came about the time of the Michael Brown shooting from you. We literally got to love the hell out of each other.
Yes,
that sound familiar?
Yeah, that sounds like something I'd say.
Let's take a break. We'll do that now. We're talking with Reverend F. Willis Johnson. He is about to depart the Ferguson area, the St. Louis area, for a new assignment in Ohio. Back to continue the conversation. And if you'd like to be a part of it, we'd love to hear from you. Perhaps you'd like to say goodbye to Willis Johnson. 382-8255 is the number. That's 382-TALK. You can send us an email to talk@stlpublicradio.org, or if you would prefer, send us a tweet at STL On Air. Back in a moment. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. And welcome back to our conversation with F. Willis Johnson. And I have to make a correction. I was talking about Bruce Franks a little while ago, and I think I inadvertently said Bruce Smith. But you picked up on it and said the same thing. Anyway, if Bruce Franks is listening, our apologies. What happens to Wellspring Church now?
Well, Wellspring was part of a project in missional kind of exploration. It was what we call in the business a parachute plant, and so the church formerly was a Methodist church that had dissolved, and so we looked to recontextualize that space. By decision of the bishop or the cabinet and the powers that are greater, they have decided to close that physical space. And I'm sure at some point there will continue to be, a presence of ministry continued by the United Methodist Church in the area, but that physical space and that actual project of Wellspring was discontinued. So,
do the congregants have someplace easily accessible?
Well, there's offerings. We have other Methodist churches in that area. We have encouraged them in ways as they felt led to remain either connected. Others have found different places. Unfortunately, that's above my pay grade. But its spirit lives. Its spirit continues to live. And I know a lot of people are disappointed. I've had parents who were like, no summer program this year, no summer, no educational enrichment. That's a little disheartening. But I think our presence and our work and our collaboration with others in that community, that's not in vain. The Ferguson Library in its work has grown immensely since 2014. FYI, St. Stephen's in the Vine, Reverend Steve Lawler, who's right around the corner, has picked up a lot of the slack and is providing those resources that people have known Wellspring and in our center to be supportive of. So the center will remain present. We're doing trainings and immersion programs right now with visiting communities in Ferguson, even though our physical kind of office space and staff will remain connected to the St. Louis Community Foundation.
You mentioned the library, and we've mentioned this many, many times. What a community resource the library in Ferguson became right after the shooting and since. It really has become a kind of a pillar in the community, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. No, their leadership and their director is awesome. And here's the thing. It's not me. I'm not going to take credit, but I think what we all learned was that our institutions have to operate from the outside in versus from the inside out. It is not uncommon to see not only the director of the library, not only now police officers, leaders who are walking, living. Our motto and our work is do life together. Mm-hmm. I think we have, along with others, have at least championed and modeled this idea that if we avail ourselves, open our doors, and allow people to come in and us minister or serve as needed. I joke, Brother Marsh, sometimes because I say we did all this in the launching up to the church and so forth. We did all this stuff. We did focus groups. We asked people a lot of questions and all kind of things. But here's the thing. We asked people questions premised on the fact that we were going to open a church there anyway. Mm-hmm. We never asked the question, do you want a church? Mm-hmm. And so I think the library is one example. And there are others who have taken, I think, recalibrated or adapted their pedagogy or their philosophy and practice to say, let's meet people as they wish to be met and desire.
I want to take a call, but you only get to know people when you get to know people.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
And understand them when you make that effort. Let's bring in Jackie. She's calling from Ferguson. You might recognize her. I suspect you might. Go ahead, Jackie.
Hello, Pastor Johnson. This is Jackie, one of your former parishioners.
Hey, sister.
I just wanted to say on behalf of everybody, you just talked about meeting people where they are. I met you from where I was, and you made me better. You made me better. You've made this community better. You've made each and every one of us who you've allowed us into your life and your experience better, and you've made this community better. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Leave it on the field, Pastor, just like you taught me. Leave it on the field.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
That has to be gratifying after 7.5 years to see how you've touched people.
Yes, it's very humbling. I know I've learned, this community has learned me how to pastor. I think more importantly, my wife and and our children have just been grateful that people have allowed us to love them, and they've loved us back, and we're thankful for that.
You know, we've kind of danced around this. I'll ask you specifically about how well do you think the community has healed in the last 4 years? I mean, obviously there are issues, you've alluded to them, but in terms of overall, you give it a C. Is that basically where you want to stay with that?
I'll give general leadership, political leadership, a C, both in Ferguson and just across to the legislature of Jeff City around how they've dealt with the issues in this in these times. I've said this before. Ferguson is no different than the other 90-something municipalities in the area. St. Louis is a very prideful, parochial, and territorial landscape. And while there are a lot of ways in which people we can define how people interact, whether that's unloving or oppressive or racist, whatever the definings, underneath all of that really is this idea, particularly in Ferguson, people want to know that you're there and you're vested. And for some reason that's important because there's this sense and need to have control or security and so forth. I think that the community of particular Ferguson has shown itself, one, to be resilient. And I think it's a collective resilience. I have seen in the last 3 or 4 years how that relationships have strengthened or new relationships have formed because now people have realized that, when stuff happens, it affects all of us. Some things happen on West Florissant, but some businesses on South Florissant got affected. Some of the businesses on South Florissant that got affected, even though they may have been perceived or present themselves as, white owned or controlled, the people that work in those businesses or the lives that are connected to those businesses were not just white folks' lives. There were, I'll just use an example. Hopefully Mike doesn't get mad at me. But Ferguson Brew House is a central place in our community. And if people don't pay attention, they could probably just assume what they want to assume about it. It is one of the most diverse and eclectic places in Ferguson. And when Michael Brown happened, every elk political disposition had not only a response but was impacted by that. I think Ferguson learned a lot. I know I learned a lot. And so I give Ferguson right now, I give it a B. I think the people are working towards that. But what the real dividing lines are still are around economics. It's around social-political kinds of stuff. And so what you have now is a community that is divided between the homeowners and the nots, those who are able to, make educational decisions for their children and those who are forced to go to public schools that are still marginally what they ought to be. Those kinds of things are what are dividing communities like Ferguson.
If you give the politicians a C and you give the community a B, what about the religious community in Ferguson? What kind of grade does it get through all of this?
Well, I can only grade my space. Again, I'll stick with us. As much as we provided things that we provided for and we modeled as best as we could, as a local church of Wellspring, who's part of a larger denomination, we did not do our best. We weren't at our best. Matter of fact, we, like many churches, really don't know what it means to be community developers and leaders. We had more relationships with people outside the church, which we should, but we struggle to bring people into what is that inner circle. The church is going to have to universally see itself not as a point of destination, but as a repository, as a resource. When we act as a resource, when we act as the citadel, so to speak, where when in crisis or in need, people can come and then they find themselves having a reciprocal kind of relationship, we're strong. But to think as an institution that we are powerful, we found that out on the first days when clergy went out with protesters and say, oh, let's get together and pray. And they cussed them out. And the church had to recoil and recalibrate. So collectively, starting with Wellspring, I'll give it a C as well. But honestly, we're not doing our best work if the community is not changing. We're not supposed to be the what's the old adage? We're not supposed to be the thermometer. We're supposed to be the thermostat.
Yeah, it occurred to me during the height of the problems that the more outreach was necessary. That word from the pulpit wasn't necessarily getting to the street where it needed to be at that time.
No, and I wrestled with that. One of the greatest compliments that I've seen in my ministry was to see young men and women who I know who were on the front lines, who are still on the front lines of doing work in this community, who graced the threshold of our church, not just when we were having gatherings and supports and trainings, but who would come on our Sunday morning, and who found some sense of connection or encouragement, who could hear, what you're telling us out here, we're saying in here. But that's a challenge. I mean, you have to work to that. You have to want to wrestle with that. We do a good job of being benevolent and charitable as an institution. We have to, particularly my denomination, we're going to have to do a much better job of being relevant.
Which brings us, if I may, to young people. Got to be relevant to everybody, but young people in particular, they're the future.
Well, yeah, and it probably would help if everybody who's leading the church wasn't an old fart like me.
Let's not go there.
As I go forward, another learning piece is that it's imperative for me to keep in my line of not only relationship but in leadership around and with me persons who are reflective of our movement, from across generation, across diversity of experience and expression. And let's be honest, most of our congregations, particularly even in Ferguson and North County, we look as segregated or as partisan as the community sometimes.
The old story: the most segregated place on Sunday morning is black and white churches.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Well, as long as we're grading people today, I'll grade you. We've given C's and B's and C pluses. You get an A plus for the work you've done here. You're very, very highly respected for what you've done. Important work, and I'm sure that will continue in Columbus. Thank you so much, Jeff Willis Johnson. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being with us for 7.5 years.
Thank you, Brother Marsh.
All the best to you. Archive versions of past St. Louis On the Air programs are available for download or podcast at stlpublicradio.org/STLOnAir. St. Louis On the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. Thank you for listening. I'm Don Marsh.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.